The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is an adventure game where its open world is jam-packed full of things to do and see, and I mean jam-packed. Exploring, fighting, looting, puzzling, climbing, side questing, any and all these things could be just around the corner in this version of Hyrule. However, despite all of this, Breath of the Wild somehow manages not to suffer from what a lot of really good open world games suffer from today: a cluttered map. First, let's just take a step back and have a look at a psychological principle called subitizing. A term derived from the Latin word for subitus, meaning sudden. Subitizing describes a human's ability to know how many objects are in a certain space without having to count them, and also draws a line between when the human goes from being able to just know and actually having to count the objects. Let's use an example for this. If we look into positron emission tomography research, in which the research carried out looked into and compared the brain activity associated with enumeration processes inside 1 to 4 items and 5 to 8 items for counting. Essentially, the study found that in the 5 to 8 item range, a different part of the brain was activated that was usually activated when shifting one's attention, thus showing that it was more likely in the higher range for the brain to lose focus on the whole and has to refocus on individual items, almost forcefully pigeonholing themselves. Now, if we take a look at a different study by Aleister Crowley in 1913, he actually found that 3 weeks old humans can already subitize up to 3 items at a time, which is pretty remarkable. But by the time a human grows to the age of 7, on average this ability increases to the 4 to 7 range. Now, these studies are interesting to me for sure, especially how you can already see that their results correlate and thus support each other. But let's move on to some practical uses that you can come across in your daily lives but haven't really noticed until now. Can you tell me what this is straight away, what this number is? Maybe it would be easier if I did this. Once that number sequence, which can be identified as 10 items, is then split into 4, it makes it a lot easier to read and is the reason behind the use of commas in numbers. Another example which you may never have noticed before is the tally chart. Now, what is easier to read? This? Or this? Again, it follows the same principle and backs up Crowley's study. Sticking with the example of numbers, you can even go as far back as the Incans, who used a counting system called Yapana, in which they place up to 5 counters at a time, no more than 5, into connected trays which they will use for calculations. But anyway, now that I've given you a lesson in psychology that you didn't ask for, let's relate it back to Breath of the Wild. The map in and of itself, if zoomed out to the fullest, can be cluttered. And I won't deny that because it is the truth. However, the game world itself is designed in a way that 1, it is unlikely that a player will zoom out far enough to see all of the map unless they want to fast travel. And 2, it caters to a specific core gameplay loop that the player will progress throughout the game. When you first start your campaign in Breath of the Wild, you are given what is essentially a blank map. If you, as the player, want to fill in that map, you must climb to the top of these different towers in the world and activate them. But the really clever thing is that once you have activated the tower, it becomes a fast travel point. And one other thing that the tower gives you is a great view of the surrounding area that you have just added to your map. Now, one of the other tools at your disposal is the scope, that allows you to get a zoomed in view from a distance, i.e. from the top of the tower. And its other function is that it allows you to place down markers directly from inside the scope, which then gets added to your map. I decided to go around every single tower of the game, and to the best of my ability, I tried to mark any and all points of interest, which I deemed to either be towers or shrines. And not once did I ever run out of markers, of which you only get 5. Do you see the link I'm trying to make here? Hateno Tower, I could only spot 3. At Lake Tower, I could only see 5 points of interest. Ridgeland Tower, again 5. Edlin Tower, 4 were visible, and 5 were visible at Akalat Tower. Once you start adding more and more waypoint markers, you begin to confuse the player because of that shift in attention that I was talking about earlier, making the player lose focus and potentially getting overwhelmed. Death Stranding is a big offender in this regard. Also, just a little side note, I am currently playing through The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt as I make this video, and I did notice that though their map is considerably more cluttered than Breath of the Wild, they do at least have a feature where you can zoom out and select one of the 5 regions in the game to go to, without getting distracted from the clutter. Anyway, moving on. I started researching for this video because I remembered the 4 to 7 range from a psychology class I took in college, and I could relate that to the 5 marker limit in Breath of the Wild. But what I didn't realise is that not only is it a cool visual limitation that has psychological validity behind it, but a core design decision that influenced so much of the world as a whole. Imagine you climb to the top of the tower, and in your line of sight there were 9 shrines. You mark 5 of them, as it is the maximum you could mark at one time, and you go to each one and conquer that shrine. Then, after you've done that, you go back to the top of the tower again to mark the final 4 that you missed first time around. But you just can't find that final 4th shrine that you saw earlier. You know it must be around here somewhere, but you do remember it was a tricky one to find in the first place, and you just can't recall whereabouts it is. Yeah, that would definitely be frustrating. Not to mention the bore of repeatedly returning to the same place to look for more and more shrines in this sea of content, which will decrease the quality and mystery of the discoveries, more so than impress the player on how much content there is in the game. Having the world design / level design be so in tandem with the idea of almost protecting the player from being overwhelmed through this core gameplay loop is genius and pulled off to perfection in this game. However, there are 15 towers in this game, and definitely way more than 75 shrines, 120 to be exact, which means there are some shrines that you just can't see from any towers. Yet of course, they still exist. And the designers planned this, of course. As you walk around the world, you may start to hear a beeping. This is your shrine detector that is designed to go off and rapidly increase its repetitions the closer you get to shrines, whether flying, swimming, climbing or walking. So they did foresee and most likely purposefully designed that the player can come across additional shrines on the way to shrines that they have already marked on the map for the towers. So say you do come across these shrines, whilst you've already got 5 markers placed down. What do you do as a player in that situation? Well, the most logical and least painful answer would be to just go into the shrine, complete it and then continue to the shrine that you were originally going to go to. But what if you don't want to do that shrine right now? It doesn't matter the reason, but let's just say that it's a combat shrine and you don't really want to do a combat shrine right now. Well, you've run out of markers as they are being used on the other shrines that you have spotted on the tower, and if you decide to replace one of the existing markers with one of the other shrines, then you may end up in a scenario that I stated earlier, where you eventually return to the tower and you can no longer find the shrine that you was originally going to. So they added stamps for such eventuality. Stamps are a very subtle part of the map, and they only really catch your eye if you are actively seeking them out. From a UI design perspective, that wouldn't usually be a good idea. However, from a decluttering standpoint, it does its job well. If you remember which part of the map you have left any stamps, it's more than easy enough to find it, and if you really tried looking over the map, again, it's relatively easy to find any and all stamps. Admittedly, the colours of the stamps do match most of the palette of the map, but the art style is way more minimalist than the art style of the map, and the focus point of each stamp is bold and the design overall is very clear. And if you didn't know, I am very glad that Breath of the Wild doesn't have a cluttered map, because the map itself is so much fun to explore. If you take the time to really zoom in and glide around the map, you can find all sorts that you may not have been allowed to have your attention drawn to if a bunch of radio tower waypoint blinkers or bandit camp icons were cluttering every corner of the map. Just look at this when I was scouting Akla Tower. When I zoomed in, I noticed a little circle in the lake next to one of the shrine markers. I decided to zoom in a little more, and what do I find? A cool as hell looking snake donut. A snake donut that I also spotted on the opposite end of the map near Lavera Beach. Or perhaps it was when I decided to scout around the edges of Goron City, just to see what secrets this unforgiving type of environment could have within. Yep, a cool ass looking skull lake. Or maybe you could have just simply spotted the QR code looking maze at the top of the map just over the gap from the Great Hyrule Forest. Seriously guys, if you are struggling to find somewhere to explore in this game for some reason, just spend a minute or two looking at the map and you'll be surprised surprised as to what you will find. Just look at this screenshot of a giant sword I took last year, just because I wanted to know what was hiding atop that great flat mountain peak on the map. I do love Breath of the Wild, even more so than any of the other Zelda games. I think that much has been clear from the very start of this video, and the map is just one reason why. When you play Breath of the Wild, it has an incredibly different feel to it than any other Zelda game. Yes, it is in part to its massive open world and systemic gameplay, but the atmosphere is slow and somber due to the context and sound design. The almost bare and beautiful map that is carefully crafted both in the UI and in-game to be as simple and as little overwhelming as possible goes a long way to matching the game's atmosphere, which is subtle yet incredibly important design. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you for watching. One of my next upcoming videos is going to focus on The Witcher 3. So if you want to find out what lessons that game can teach us, then make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon. If you didn't know, I am also an indie game developer with my own studio called Crab Studios. If you want to find out more information about our upcoming board game, make sure to check out our social media in the description below. Thanks, and I shall see you next week.